Hi, my name's Cole, and I'm a mixed race man who's also queer and trans. I'm a person who is seen in Canada as a white person, so I have white privilege, even though I am a racialized person who has experienced racism in my life. So I'm committed to using my privilege, using my my light skin privilege, my white privilege, if you like, and my cisgender passing privilege, and my male privilege to stand in solidarity with all oppressed people and all marginalized people, especially people experiencing racism and also transphobia and heterosexism in Hamilton and beyond.
Hi, my name is Gashi Isa, and here are the things that I have done to combat hate in Hamilton. I have volunteered with community groups to combat racism in the education system, and I have volunteered with Caremongering Hamilton to ensure that community members have access to food during this pandemic. Thank you, No Hate in the Hammer.
Hello, my name is Hugh Tai. My commitment to combating the rise of hate is both personal and professional. I acknowledge that because of my social identity, I am a person with immense privilege in this society. I want to use that privilege to advocate for transformational systemic change. I have been working with No Hate in the Hammer to build a broad coalition of Hamiltonians to challenge and work towards the eradication of hate in this community. I am part of the work of Hamilton Community Legal Clinic to implement a robust anti-racism, anti-oppression framework to influence the decision-making in all aspects of our work, from human resources to personal interactions, client service, and community engagement. I continue my personal journey of listening, learning, and standing up against inequity, racism, and oppression in all its forms, but especially hate. I am definitely a work in progress, but I find strength working in collaboration with committed people who want to make change in the Hammer. Nobody does it alone.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wayland, and I'm part of the No Hate in the Hammer collective. Over the past year, from being involved in this group, I have grown in awareness of how individual and systemic practices reinforce each other to create exclusion and injustice, including my own complicity and complacency. I have committed to being a visible and effective advocate, to showing up at public events against hate and for Black lives, and to demanding better from our leaders. Beat the system.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Gashi et voici ce que j'ai fait pour combattre la haine à Hamilton. J'ai travaillé avec des groupes communautaires pour combattre le racisme dans le système éducatif et j'ai travaillé avec Caremongering Hamilton pour assurer que les membres de la communauté ont accès à la nourriture pendant cette pandémie. Merci, pas de haine dans la Hammer.
Hello, my name is Rashad, and I wanted to say that being part of the No Hate in the Hammer community has helped me grow so much, both personally and professionally. I am more careful with how I speak, how I address people who are different than I am, and I just try to approach people with the respect and dignity I was met with at No Hate in the Hammer. And on the professional level, it has really kind of expanded the horizons for my work as to what I could do on like a community engagement level and on a communications level to further spread this sense of respect and love in our community.
My name is Ruth Greenspan, and I'm the Executive Director of the John Howard Society in Hamilton. I am really excited to have with me here our Diversity, Equity, Inclusivity Committee. Those who are on the committee and not here, we apologize. We are going to talk about what we have done to fight hate over the last year or on a go-forward basis. So for me, I am very committed to continuing to break down the silos and not accept any kinds of hate within the community, within our agency, other places that we live and work, to try to challenge that, to be an ally, to move to an advocate. And also, I have committed and will continue to read, to watch things, to improve my knowledge, to talk to people, and I always try to have those courageous conversations. I give it now to Amberlynn, please.
I'm committed to examining my practice with the individuals that I work with in my community, also examining how I show up in the world and acknowledging my blind spots and the things that I don't know and not being afraid to say I don't know, and be committed to learning when I am in a space where there is information I'm not aware of. I'm also committed to asking tough questions, examining the practices that we have throughout the community and in the agency to make sure that we're serving individuals appropriately and nobody gets left behind.
Hello, I'm Donna. I am committing to acknowledging and learning more about my own privilege, as well as engaging in a process of educating myself to be a better ally. And I commit to doing that through listening to and hearing stories of hate and oppression and respecting the experiences of others.
Hi, my name is Garth Bell, and I'm committing to help create change. My family has been in this city for over 100 years. I'm a Black Indigenous man, and I've been the recipient of hate for over 100 years, and I'm committed to stand up along with the allies and create change in the city.
Hi, I'm Jeff. I'm committed to continuing being both an ally and an advocate, as well as helping to challenge intolerance and ignorance and embrace it with knowledge and communicate acceptance, and trying to break down walls of hate and try to further discussions in a positive light, and to, as an individual, hopefully progress myself further and become an even better advocate and ally and continue forward.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I'm committed to adding anti-hate and anti-oppression in daily discourse. I'm also committed to acknowledging my social location in every space I go into, and just being aware of that, and also just inviting people to do the same as well.
I'm Kimberly, and I'm committed to educating myself to all forms of hate so that I can become a better ally and advocate for those who are facing hate in the Hammer. By educating myself by watching videos, listening to other people's stories, and being open to critique when I need to improve what I am doing.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Gashi Isa. Welcome to the No Hate in the Hammer's first event in the series Together, Building Solidarity in Hamilton. Today, we will be talking about hate, discrimination, and solidarity in Hamilton. While we talk about these things, we must be firm in our acknowledgement that hate in Canada is not new, that the foundations of this place that we call home is grounded in hate and ongoing genocide. It's important to recognize the violence, the violence that came with colonization and theft of Indigenous lands that formed the foundations of this country. It is important, therefore, that we name the original, the past, the present, and the forever custodians of this land. I'm calling in from what we call Hamilton, which is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people, which is governed by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. This is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share the resources around the Great Lake. This covenant asks that we take care of the land and tend to the land It states that the territory is a dish that we all eat out of, but with one spoon, taking what we need and ensuring that there is some left for others. We further acknowledge that the land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase in 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. In this very moment, as we speak, land defenders and Indigenous people across what we now call Canada are being arrested and threatened for following their constitutionally granted land rights. And I say constitutionally granted because we need to understand that this country isn't even following its own colonial laws. As we talk about solidarity and action, this is the time where we can offer it up. This is the time where we can work towards a more just and free world. I think a lot about the dish with one spoon wampum agreement and what it means. It means that we tend to the land and that we take care of it and that we take what we need out of one spoon. Today's event is called Together, which also makes me think of the fact that our struggles are also connected on this land, and we share our distinct yet similar experiences through this single spoon. Our liberations will always be connected. The fight against hate is everyone's fight. So may we build movements, may we learn, grow, and combat hate, and may we also do so together. I also want to just end with this quote by Lila Watson. I think a lot of people have heard of it, but the quote is, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because your liberation is bound with mine, then let us work together." So to get the series started in a good way, we are pleased to welcome Michelle Penny to perform a traditional opening. Michelle J. Penny is a 60s scooper from the Saulteaux Nation, Yellow Quill Reserve. She is employed as a community developer for Somerset Community Health Center and has been a traditional hand drummer and singer for 20 years. Michelle believes that we can do better as human beings by listening to each other and sharing ideas which can be put into action when true understanding takes place. Her favorite saying is, "When you dream of a Sundance the night before, and the next day you make it so, you've just gone from kindergarten to university with no education in between." Welcome, Michelle.
Miigwech, and I stand on traditional Algonquin land. And as I recognize my Haudenosaunee brothers and sisters in the Mississauga Credit Nation, I also have to acknowledge the Algonquin people of where they host me. I am First Nations Treaty 4 from Saskatchewan. And as a 60s scooper, I look at the world in a different lens, through a different lens, because I grew up in Western colonial world. And I went back to my people in my early 20s. And I guess I could honestly say between that school, there's been about 3 educations, separate educations I've had in my journey to get where I'm at today. So I see this beautiful organization. I've loved every word everyone has said, the commitments that they've had and they've made. There's more commitments that you're able to make that you can make just within your own selves. Learning to connect to the land that you live on and learning what that's all about, and being able to feel what our people are doing, where the human rights for us really truly comes from. It comes from the land. We're not just protecting ourselves, we're protecting the next 7 generations. And that next 7 generations is what we've lived so far in the past 7 generations. And we're leaving our youth very scared. They have a lot of grief about the environment. And they're doing a lot of work, our youth, for this land, for this country. And I have such gratitude for them, but we got to do better. Before I leave, we got to make a mark to help them, because right now they're just overwhelmed with all the problems that we have. So I wake up in the morning and I try to do whatever it is that I'm able to do. And I use the medicines when I'm able to, and I've been using them a lot lately. But one of my medicines actually is singing, and I love to sing, and I love to greet the day, and I love to be able to express myself through the songs as each one tells a story. But today I have a song that's very simple, and if you know it, sing along at home. If you don't know it, you can easily learn it here and remember it, because it's very important to remember your environment and to be thankful for it. I'm thankful for what Creator has put on this earth. Every being of it, every person, everything around me. And this is what this song is pretty much going to be about. It's just saying thank you. And I'm going to sing it 4 times because in every direction, I want them to know that I'm appreciative. And there's many more directions than the 4, but we'll represent those today for the beautiful talk we're going to have. Miigwech. Miigwech Netawina Miigwech Netawina Miigwech 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 Netawina Miigwech Netawina Miigwech 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 Netawina Miigwech Netawina Miigwech Miigwech Miigwech, 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 Miigwech. Oh. I hope we have a great meeting.
Thank you so much, Michelle Miigwech. Thank you. We all bring a good heart and a good mind to this conversation and the task of capacity building to challenge hate as a community. And thank you, Gashi, for that wonderful land acknowledgement. It is so important that we begin a public gathering by acknowledging the land, the ancestors of 7 generations who have protected this land, the impact of colonial history, and the urgency of reconciliation efforts. This is particularly important as we gather to discuss discrimination and hate in our community. My name is Muna Bileh, and it is my pleasure to be your host for the speaker series that we're calling Together, Building Solidarity in Hamilton. Bienvenue. Tout d'abord, je tiens à répéter qu'il est très important que nous commencions ce rassemblement public en reconnaissant la terre, les ancêtres de cette génération qui ont protégé cette terre, l'impact de l'histoire coloniale et l'urgence des efforts de réconciliation. Ceci est particulièrement important alors que nous nous réunissons pour discuter de la discrimination et de la haine dans notre communauté. Je m'appelle Muna Bileh et je suis heureuse d'être votre animatrice pour cette série de conférenciers. La conférence se poursuivra en anglais. Cependant, nous invitons les membres de notre communauté francophone à poser leurs questions et commentaires en français. We have an action-packed session for the next 75 minutes or so. We hope you will engage with us in this inaugural conversation about community building as a response to hate. We have a brief introduction to No Hate in the Hammer and this speaker series, and then we will launch into discussion. Ruth Greenspan is here to tell us about the origins of No Hate in the Hammer. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Muna. So back in the winter of 2019, I was walking by City Hall on the way to the Y, actually, and there were many yellow vesters, many people who I knew did not belong in our city and were not welcoming. And this was going on every Saturday, every afternoon, going later and later with more and more people. And I became really angry because I was seeing that we were becoming the hate capital of Canada. And that wasn't something I wanted to be a part of. So I had been at a forum on racism in Hamilton, and there I was able to connect with a couple of people who are around this table. And we started to talk about what can we do? And we realized we needed to connect with other like-minded people, and we needed to build a coalition. And at first we looked at the name Fight the Right, but we decided that wasn't really what we wanted. What we wanted was to say, no hate in the Hammer. This is our home and we're not about hate. So we started to meet, we came up with a name, we came up with a logo that many of us are wearing on a t-shirt, which are for sale at any point on our website. But what we were really determined to do was organize in solidarity and break down those silos that had divided us. So come June, when everything happened at Pride, which Cameron will certainly go into, we had seen more and more hate dividing us, more and more hate turning to violence. And by August, we had our launch. And we said, let's see who is going to join. And we had over 100 people join us. And it was amazing. And this was a group who was wanting to build coalition, who were wanting to organize. And we decided we would organize around solidarity and allyship. So our first point of work is we had to come up with a vision, a mission, a purpose, and values for No Hate in the Hammer. And as you see, the most important parts we came up with was that social change through education, collaboration, knowledge sharing, and advocacy. Really, we wanted to change from being the hate capital to being Hamilton, the inclusive city. We wanted it to be a place people were safe, not a place where people were fearful. And with our values, most important is that culture of non-blaming, non-shaming, where everybody works together in solidarity and allyship. We are always looking for new members, and we really want people to go to our website, nohateinthehammer.ca. Join us, become a member, and we would be happy to have you. We have other social media as well, and please, whatever social media you're using, we urge you to become involved with us in that way. Thank you, and please, we would love you to be part of No Hate in the Hammer. And Hugh, can you talk to us now about what the speaker series is all about?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ruth. As Ruth has indicated, a key part of No Hate in the Hammer's mandate is to facilitate educational opportunities to learn about confronting hate. So prior to the pandemic, we were planning a very large community event, which was to have taken place last month. The event would look at hate in the city and how to respond to it as a community. Experienced facilitators from the Southern Poverty Law Center in the US, which has been doing this work for many decades, along with a sister organization in the Pacific Northwest called Western States Center, are committed to helping with our public discussion, action workshops, and youth education. Together with local activists and campaign organizers, it would bring a broad coalition of people committed to inclusion and strong allyship, or what we're calling solidarity. With COVID, of course, we have had to reschedule to next year. We're now planning a virtual event in the spring of 2021, and we will share details as soon as we can. An important resource for us, and shown here on your screen, is the Southern Poverty Law Center's community resource guide called 10 Ways to Fight Hate. We recommend it and their website. And in the lead up to the spring workshops, we're holding this speaker series, which we're launching today. Thank you for joining us. And we're doing this once a month. We want to strengthen our knowledge, build the coalition of committed allies, learn about how communities are impacted, and how to respond together to make Hamilton an inclusive community. We'll talk about concrete actions like protection, prevention, and partnership. And effectively, this conversation series is a teaser for the spring event when we can go into more depth and work together. We hope you'll join us on this learning and action journey. And now Maria Antello is going to briefly run through the speaker series topics. Hey, Maria.
Hi, Hugh. Thank you so much for this. I wanted to give a shout out to Sandy Bell, who wasn't able to join us today, who was with us since the beginning of this project. So you will see in our screen shortly, there is some logic to the speaker series to build our knowledge. Today is an overview on hate, an important foundation piece for this work. November 18th is a look at anti-racism and anti-oppression, another foundation piece that centers hate in systems, structures, and institutions that perpetuate white supremacy and other oppressions. December 9th, we will look at allyship, or what we are calling solidarity, with an activist lens and how to be an accomplice in the struggle for inclusion. On January 27, 2021, the focus is on restorative justice, an approach to combating hate and conflict and heal communities. Finally, March 3rd, 2021, is with our colleagues from the Southern Poverty Law Center and Western State Center, talking about a community response to hate and what to expect at the spring event. With your participation, this is an exciting series. We want to start our conversation now. Muna will be asking questions of our guests. Please feel free to participate by entering questions and comments in the question and answer box. We will be monitoring your comments throughout, and we will do our best to add you to the conversation. Muna?
Thank you so much, Maria. So yeah, we are very excited to kick things off today with a kind of hate 101, if you will. In the last few weeks, the Department of Homeland Security in the US told a Senate committee that white supremacists pose the most persistent and lethal threat to American security. The FBI also issued a bulletin warning that the election would likely be the target of violence by extremist groups. The president has refused to condemn white supremacists and told them to stand by. In Canada, hate crimes, and xenophobia are also on the rise. The intolerant amongst us have become more open about their prejudice. Hateful voices have become louder, especially on the internet and in social media. After the killing of Mohammed Aslam Zafiz, a 58-year-old Muslim man outside a Toronto mosque last month, a coalition of multi-faith human rights organizations urged the Prime Minister to come up with a plan to dismantle white supremacist groups. The Canadian Anti-Hate Network is part of that coalition. We are extremely pleased to welcome as our first guest, the Executive Director, Evan.
Hi there, thank you very much.
Thank you, Evan. He's the Director of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Should I just launch into it, or are we doing more introductions?
Well, first I have a question to ask you, which is, if you could please tell us about the kind of hate movements that exist in Canada and about their proliferation.
Sure, so we have a number of different kinds of hate movements in Canada, all of which can be found in Ontario and in Hamilton. That's everything from different flavors of neo-Nazi to anti-LGBT groups, most of them with a Christian influence, to a large number of groups which I would fit broadly under an anti-Muslim umbrella. And that's not to dismiss other kind of movements such as the incel movement, but just in the interest of times today, I'm going to talk about kind of the ones that individuals are kind of most likely to run into, especially kind of in Ontario and in Hamilton. And the number one movement there would be the anti-Muslim movement. So this, of course, there was Islamophobia and all other forms of discrimination and racism in Canada before 2015. But around the end of 2015 and 2016, we really saw an explosion of far-right groups that got a lot of energy from opposition, both to Liberal government and then the election of Trump. They had a lot of energy online, and this came this really boiled over when there was Motion 103 before Parliament, which was a motion to condemn Islamophobia, much like similar motions to condemn other forms of bigotry before it. Rebel media really made it sound like this was going to prohibit any criticisms of Islam or anything of the sort, and of course it wasn't. But this big anti-Islam, anti-Muslim movement that had been fomenting itself online took to the streets at this point. And from 2016 on, we saw this movement, which everybody at first was calling, an anti-Islam movement or saying it was about free speech. We were kind of on the forefront and kind of deep into it and saying like, no, look, like they're saying that the only good Muslim is a dead Muslim. They're saying that all Muslims lie. And so we were exposing what they were privately saying so we could better publicly characterize the kind of groups involved. So there's a lot of groups that fall under this umbrella now of the anti-Muslim movement. But I do want to be clear about one thing. Like when we label a movement, this is an anti-Muslim movement with a lot of groups in it. That doesn't mean the number one thing they're going to be hating on any given day is going to be Muslims. They really kind of follow whatever's in the media cycle. So when it was solidarity blockades, when it was Black Lives Matter, when it was the early days of COVID, you know, they're going after Indigenous folks, Black folks, and Chinese folks respectively, depending on what is in the news cycle. But we continue to refer to them as the anti-Muslim movement because that's what their DNA is. And in the absence of other things going on, they always kind of revert back to that first bigotry that's often their most important issue. We also saw them over the last few years come to an alliance of sorts with anti-LGBTQ plus individuals and groups. And these are people like the hate preachers, including the ones that, of course, crashed into the Hamilton Pride. But also there are, you know, moneyed organizations that will swoop in anytime somebody is being charged with a hate crime, for example, for spreading hate against the LGBTQ plus community. There are moneyed individuals in this movement that will swoop in and pay for their lawsuits, right? Very hard to hold the individuals accountable because they're not fighting any of these battles with their own money. And then we have the various kinds of Nazi groups. And, you know, we broadly speaking have three flavors of neo-Nazis here in Canada today. You know, we have the old, what I think of now as old school neo-Nazis or boneheads. These are people like Blood and Honor, like the Hammerskins. These are ones that you'd know from like the 90s that rolled around. They were immediately identifiable on the street and they were beating people up on the street, right? But they're not as active anymore, and many of them are much older. Instead, we have the alt-right movement. We have the Groypers, and we have these individuals that have basically the exact same ideologies, but have dressed it up, and they're younger. They don't talk too much with the old school neo-Nazis and boneheads, which is why it's useful to kind of separate them out. But the ideologies are basically the same. We also have pro-terrorism neo-Nazis that have been inspired by groups like Atomwaffen Division and the Base. Now, these aren't ones you're going to run into kind of on the street or see be public about their affiliation, but they're killing people. So kind of discussing Hamilton, you know, we're gonna and Ontario, we're probably going to touch the most on these anti-Muslim groups, the anti-LGBTQ plus groups, and some of the, you know, alt-right style neo-Nazis, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, one thing, just a bit about our organization. I've been following this stuff for about 5 years. We started up the organization about 2.5 years ago. And we're really meant to be a Band-Aid and like a watchdog organization. We don't tackle issues of systemic or institutional racism or discrimination. We very much support those efforts. We just have like one very kind of limited mandate with our limited resources, which is kind of when hate groups start to organize themselves online or on the streets, we're there, we're watching them. That's kind of like the one big thing we do, and we try to stop it when it gets to that very bad expression of a lot of other systemic issues, right? So that's kind of what we do. We don't get involved with organizing or doing on the ground stuff ourselves. We mostly use the tools of journalism, and that's how we kind of follow this stuff. And there was a long period of time in 2019, especially, that we had a very close eye on Hamilton. Because I think I wrote an article, and I just looked it up earlier in June 10th, I wrote an article saying that Hamilton was becoming the front line of Ontario hate group activity. And to kind of discuss how we got there, the anti-Muslim movement rebranded itself when M103 didn't make the Skyfall. You know, they really started adding on anti-Trudeau government and other kinds of rhetoric into their whole milieu. And in France, we had the Yellow Vests demanding, you know, government accountability and a whole variety of other like legitimate issues. Here in Canada, people stole that Yellow Vest title. And I was watching this happen, within like 3 or 4 days, there were over 120,000 people on Facebook that were signed up for this Yellow Vest Canada group. And, you know, we were immediately concerned because we saw all the people who were like starting this group were the same people we were already watching because they were in the anti-Muslim movement. And that's kind of going to become a common theme with what happens here in Canada, is that, you know, the group names might change, but the people are often the same people. So we keep a close eye on the people who organize. So they created this big group of like 120,000 people within 3 days, and it grew bigger and bigger than that. And then they had this big convoy of sorts they were going to take to Ottawa. They envisioned it kind of like the convoys and the protests that were happening in France. Of course, they didn't hit nearly the numbers they expected. and they started to fizzle out. But while all this was happening, they were having weekly demonstrations in communities all across Canada. And of course, the bigger the city, the bigger the demonstration. So Hamilton was seeing these demonstrations happen just as they were happening across the country. When their whole big convoy project fizzled out, the Yellow Vest movement kind of went into, let's call it a recession of sorts for a while, and it never really recovered. But the one place where it didn't really go into a recession was Hamilton. They continued to be active there. And, you know, our analysis of that, we chalked it up to a couple things. But the big point we thought was they relocated, a lot of people relocated from trying to do things in Toronto to Hamilton for two reasons. One of them being the anti-fascist community in Toronto was much larger and was very forceful in opposing them. So they were not having much success in getting their critical mass in Toronto. Conversely, when they started doing things in Hamilton, they saw the police were taking a much heavier hand with anti-fascists and anti-racists in Hamilton than they were with members of hate groups. And the natural result of that is that hate groups are emboldened. They hold more demonstrations. They're more likely to use violence. Things get out of control when they perceive the police as supporting them. Another great example of this, you know, we can watch this happen in real time and predict when these things happen. Red Deer, Edmonton, you know, a bunch of racists just broke up an anti-racist rally violently while the RCMP stood by. And then, you know, a week later, they're having brawls in a parking lot. You know, like this is predictable. We can watch the trajectory of this kind of stuff happen. And Hamilton was perhaps one of the worst examples of hate groups being emboldened.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you actually touched a bit on Hamilton. I was going to ask you to give us some input on what you see happening in Hamilton. But in terms of, you know, the role of conspiracies, especially online in social media, what do you think is, what is their role and how impactful are these conspiracies in real time?
Sure. So that catches us up to what's going on right now. So across Canada, Hamilton, no exception. You know, there's a large number of people who are doing these kind of anti-mask, anti-vax demonstrations. I understand in Hamilton, there's some people going to the mall, you know, trying to get them to refuse service because they have the mask and like make dumb videos about it, right? And they're going to City Hall, and I understand that's also included some QAnon types. So we saw with the anti-mask and anti-vax movements that the QAnon movement, which to back up one step, the QAnon movement is a conspiracy, which at the very end of it says there's a liberal elite that is kidnapping and sexually assaulting children, both because they enjoy it, because they're satanic pedophiles, but also because they want the kids to be afraid, so that they produce adrenaline, so that they can take the adrenaline from the children and essentially drink their blood to stay young. That's actually where QAnon ends, but it doesn't start there, right? It starts by saying they're just against like pedophiles and children being trafficked, right? It starts by saying that there's this big globalist, elitist, liberal conspiracy, and Bill Gates is actually responsible for the virus, and masks like are a means of social control to make the population docile. And this QAnon movement has become dangerous because it's basically the catch-all conspiracy theory. It's incorporating everything into itself. So it's in all of the hate group spaces because they all of them believe in conspiracies to one degree or another. The anti-Muslim movement believes that all Muslims are kind of coordinating things, lying to people so that they can ultimately impose Sharia law and take over Canada, right? That's their big call to arms. They need that conspiracy theory to kind of mobilize. So the QAnon and the anti-mask types, we're seeing their conspiracy theories filter in through all of Canada's hate groups. We're actually about to publish a big piece kind of documenting that. And the net result of which is that more people are getting kind of radicalized and recruited into conspiracy theories. And it's dangerous because we're also seeing a natural progression from the anti-mask, anti-vax QAnon space into forms of racism and neo-Nazism and anti-Semitism, because that's often one conspiracy theory will spiral into another. If you're watching the radicalization of a young person, for example, one of the many paths, but a common one, is to start with anti-women propaganda. Start with pseudoscience about how the wage gap isn't real, right? Start with Jordan Peterson. Start with Stefan Molyneux. And once you have people starting to accept these arguments, then you start pushing something like race realism, where you use the same bullcrap pseudoscientific arguments, but it's just pointed at a different community, a different group of people. Now you have kids talking about like how non-white folks have lower IQs, right? Because that's the pseudoscientific argument that's being fed to them. So the one conspiracy theory, that the wage gap is a myth, has now led into other conspiracy theories because they're built on the same structures of argument and the same internal logic to those arguments. So conspiracy theories are not, the end-all be-all explanation of hate and racism, but they are often a necessary component of organized forms of it. When people get together and say, we're going to form this group that's against X, they need a reason to be there and be together. And often it's not just because we hate X. Often it's because we believe X is doing this awful thing to us, to our children, to our country. And the natural response of that is, we need to push back, we need to fight back, and everybody else is complicit and awful from that group because of the things, of the conspiracies that they believe. So conspiracies are powerful, and it's a kind of a gateway drug too. If somebody believes one set of conspiracies, they're likely to fall into another.
Mm-hmm. So, I feel like there should be two parts to this, right? How do you counter these, these fascists in the information space, but also on the ground, like as a everyday person, how do you, what resources or ideas do you have for folks and community members that do come across this type of hate, right?
Sure. I mean, and I would say I have an opinion on this, kind of based on my experience in the field, but I don't want what I say right now to be interpreted as kind of, I'm not even 100% sure on this myself, but I personally have started to give up on the idea of engaging them in any kind of rational discussion. I do think that there are examples where engaging in a rational discussion has kind of brought people out of some of these conspiracies or out of hate, but I think those examples are few and far between and not worth the energy and time and resources. I think if we're talking big picture, the best way to kind of shut down this kind of stuff is to deny them their largest platforms by a variety of means. It's much more effective to shut down one hate propagandist than to try to talk 20 people they radicalized out of the movement. So, while if somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want to leave hate behind, we're not going to shut the door on them, but we're not actively kind of seeking out those opportunities either, because we think that everybody's time and energy is best spent kind of countering the proliferation of it rather than dealing with the aftermath of it. An ounce of prevention is worth, 10 pounds of cure. So it's individuals that, want to make a difference. Again, we don't do much on the ground stuff, so I'll kind of leave that to people who do. And I would say, organize locally, connect with people that do that kind of stuff locally. But I can also say that, the on the ground stuff is supported by a lot of what is like the iceberg of anti-racism and anti-fascism, a lot of the under the surface stuff, which is building up community aid and mutual support, big part of it. Doing research so that what hate groups are up to, that's a big part of it. And that's kind of what I can speak to, because that's our bread and butter. That's what we do every day. So when it comes to that kind of work, you can start monitoring hate groups, that are organizing locally in your city today. You can get together with a few friends or like-minded folks and start doing it today. And it's so for some people, it's as simple as just follow all their pages and places online. You can find them publicly. And let the community know when you like they're planning an event or you see something. I mean, that work, just that is quite a useful act. Now, if you're willing to go a step further, again, all the most important work that we do is by infiltrating these groups to see what they're really saying behind closed doors, how they're organizing, and being able to take that out and report on it so that we can demonstrate that even though they say they're just about free speech or yada, yada, what they're saying internally is that they want to hurt these people or they hate these people. So that's very important work. I would say that with one caveat that, you know, before you engage in that kind of work, you know, please take some time and learn about how to keep yourself safe online from doxing and things like that. There are several excellent guides that have been written in that regard. And I would suggest, you know, reading those guides and following those steps first. But then, you know, you create a fake profile that looks vaguely like somebody they'd want to recruit. And you try to join their Facebook groups. And, you know, you don't have to engage in any racist or hate speech yourself. You can just kind of sit there, be a fly on the wall and see what they're saying and report that out. And that is also incredibly important work. And kind of in the information space, the kind of last thing I would also suggest is you have the ability, organizing within your community, to cancel hate group events. If you do the first part of this, which is, you know, you monitor them, you find out they're going to do something, and you have the receipts that they aren't what they claim to be and they are a hate group. If you have those receipts because you're inside the group, you can go to a venue they're trying to book for like an event, right? This is a little less relevant during the COVID era, but they kept trying to book like Legion halls and stuff before this. And so, you know, many people in the community, we weren't the only ones that were doing this. We connected people doing it locally, and several people just did this at their own accord. And it was very effective. That they would compile up all the evidence, they'd call the bar or the venue or wherever the hate groups want to hold an event, and they'd say, look, here's what they say. We hope you make the principled decision, you know, not to have these people come. And if the venue, you know, isn't on board with that, you know, you start ramping up pressure on them in a way that is, you know, reasonable. And then oftentimes, you know, they will come to understand that it's in their best interests, if not to do the moral thing, at least to do, you know, the thing that's not going to alienate the community that they have business in. And that can be very effective as well. So there's a few things that you can address. And I know we're going to kind of discuss that more in later sessions, but those are a few that I'd throw out right now that anybody can work on and start doing today.
Okay, thank you so much. I think you really did answer some questions that we did indeed have, especially around the response that community can have. There's some questions coming in from YouTube folks. So one of the question is, the incidences of hate are being tracked, and are there any statistics, numbers around these incidences that can be compared from year to year?
Yeah, that's a really important thing that I love talking about because I'm a bit of a nerd and it's not talked about nearly enough. Our hate crime statistics are awful, just absolutely unusably awful. The problem is that just like if any of you founded Robin Doolittle's amazing unfounded investigation that showed how police weren't tracking sexual assault victims' complaints, we have the exact same problem with kind of hate crime stuff. So basically what happens is if you're the victim of a crime, you first have to convince the police to take your report. They might discourage you from making a report because they're going to say, well, that's not illegal or we can't do anything about it or blah, 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 blah. Then it goes into kind of this black box of the police and you don't know what's going on inside of it. There, they might reclassify it themselves if they don't have any evidence that it was a hate crime and just your word to go on. They're probably going to declassify it as being a hate crime. And they're only going to report forward things that they can actually attest to, things they've investigated and think are a hate crime. They report those numbers forward to Statistics Canada. The net result, and I worked with a couple of researchers on this, again, we don't have great data, but the net result is that only 1 to 5% of hate crime complaints that go to police get reflected in the actual statistics. So they're useless. Now, we do have some good numbers, and those good numbers come from every year, Statistics Canada does a survey. And it's called the General Social Survey. And every so often, I think they happened last just recently. And then before that, it was like 5 years ago. But they basically ask people questions about victimization of crime. So they say like, have you been the victim of, theft in the last 12 months? But they also included questions, have you been the victim of a hate crime? And this is a much better approach to tracking it because it takes a believe the victims approach to the thing. It reaches people who might not otherwise go and report to the police or have barriers to do so. And it would let us kind of track things year after year. So we've been advocating that we really should be getting Statistics Canada to repeat that survey portion every year and even oversample it so that we can use that as a good measure. Now, I still think it's important that we have some kind of measure of how the police are doing, because they should be held accountable for having lower hate crime solve rates, which is true, for example. But importantly, I think that we should just be surveying this, and that's how we'll actually get good data on the issue finally.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we're learning a lot today. If that's okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and bring other folks into this conversation. And because we would definitely need to know about the impact of hate and taking action against it from their experience as well. So if that's okay with you, I would like to welcome Amani Williams, who is an organizer for the March for Black Lives Hamilton chapter, and community activist Cameron Croach. Thank you, Cameron and Amani, for joining us. I'll start with Amani. Amani, how has hate affected you and your community, and how has it contributed to you being an activist?
Yes, hate has just always been a part of my life because, as we know, not everybody can be loving and caring and accepting of people just based off of who they are. Unfortunately, a lot of people do see people's skin color before they understand like who they are inside. So that started from like as young as like I could remember, you know, the girls not wanting to play with me because I didn't have long princess hair, or, you know, just feeling like my skin wasn't good enough or my hair wasn't good enough. And not only that, just like systematically, just my trouble getting into jobs. Like there's just, I feel like there's no spot in life that isn't touched by hate, unfortunately, especially being a Black woman. So there was a lot of aspects of my life that were touched by hate. And because of that, that did start a fire in me to start the movement, on top of obviously everything else that happened this year, just in 2020. But just overall, I just had to create something to keep the conversation going outside of just my community.
Okay, Cameron, feel free, by the way, to answer that question if you want to add your input as well. How has hate essentially affected you, and how has it contributed to you being an activist?
Thanks so much for welcoming me to this space, and thanks for that question. It's no surprise that I've been involved in the LGBTQ community in Hamilton for a little while, and hate has had a huge impact on the community for many years. I think we like to think about what happened at Pride 2019 as, you know, a kind of capstone or something that happened that was a sort of a lightning touch moment. But what's been happening in Hamilton for Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA plus communities has been happening for a long time. White supremacists and folks that congregate with them have been showing up to Pride events and events hosted in those spaces for many years. And so that has a chilling effect on communities in general around people's safety. And so the idea that it's accepted, it's normalized in Hamilton, and to go back to what Evan was saying before, right? We have this notion of this idea of emboldening, right? And when we know folks are emboldened and that they have permission, that they're allowed, and that those who are in positions of authority don't address those issues, it allows a sort of environment to foster. And it's not just that people are worried about encountering these hate groups out in public, but they're also worried that there's nothing there to protect them and that essentially their city will stand by while it happens.
So just leading to the next, I guess, question, then what is the common ground that can bring us together and effectively, I guess, addressing these issues, but also informing our officials to ensure that they also take the appropriate actions? Evan or Amani or Cameron can answer to that question.
With me, the main thing is communication. I feel like before you start organizing anything, you have to make sure that you are still communicating with a liaison to make sure that those that do come out to support you are still protected in every way, because without that open communication with those who are supposed to protect you, especially when you are fighting for your rights, I feel like that is when we open the doors for other type of hate groups and emboldened groups to feel comfortable coming to you and triggering your group. But I feel like once they see that presence and that organization, that kind of deters them from doing the actions that they are used to doing, or that they do to take away from the movement. So my main thing is communication. Also reiterating with the people that come out to support you that this is a peaceful event, so that anybody else that deviates from what it's supposed to be is immediately removed, just so that we don't have to deal with anything that's violent or takes away from the movement that we are trying to promote.
Thank you, Amani.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good way of putting it in terms of thinking about communication. Part of that communication, and before we get to solidarity, has to be about acknowledgement, has to be about recognizing what's happening. And so we can't get to solidarity, we can't have these dialogues and discussions if we're still kind of in a phase of denial about what's happening. If people in positions of authority aren't willing to recognize or accept things that are happening, if we're going to dial our rhetoric back so that it approaches who we think our election base is, I think those things are really underestimated. When we don't have these kinds of forums like we have now to have these discussions and talk about openly what's happening in the city, if we don't look to our neighbors who are in often more oppressed situations than we are, then how are we going to be able to understand what's happening with them, acknowledge that, and then get toward the place where we can have solidarity? Because solidarity building is not an easy task. It's not the job of putting on an ally sticker and calling it a day. It's work of sitting with people, understanding what people are saying. And just like Ashley said at the beginning of this, right? If you're here to help me, you're kind of in the wrong place, right? And so it's got to be about coming together with people and building commonality with them. You can't do that if you can't see them.
Yeah. Thank you, Cameron. Okay, so I just have one more question. I think that we all know that this kind of work can be very taxing emotionally, and even just difficult. How do you remain committed to this work despite the various obstacles, whether it's your safety, your family and friends' safety, your ability to even collaborate at times with other organizations, or feeling as though you're targeted, right? So how do you remain committed to this kind of work, knowing the reality of the consequences to those that are speaking up?
For me, I just always I always ask myself, like, if I'm not doing this, what am I doing, right? So if I'm not going to stand up and if I'm not going to speak about Black rights and what my grandma and generations before that have been fighting for, then I have to think, then obviously I'm just complicit to it, right? And then I'm making it okay for others who don't look like me to continue to be complicit. So what keeps me going is the fact that if I don't keep it going, then who is going to keep it going? And then not to top it off, is the younger generation is relying on us right now to keep the movement going so that eventually one day we don't have to fight anymore. So it doesn't matter how slow we move forward, we just have to continue to move forward. And I know what some other person told me, that this movement is hard and we all do need to focus on our mental health. Sometimes you might have to take 2 days to relax, get off social media, not post anything, not research, just keep it to yourself. But once you are done that, you need to get right back into that. This is a race, and it does take each and every one of us. Even if you're just posting online, even if you are actively marching, you have to do something. You cannot just sit and be complacent, because that's the opposite of what we're doing. It's hard, but hard work, is needed to actually make change.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to what Amani's saying about this being a race, it's also a relay race, right? This is a race, a generational relay race. Listening to folks in Indigenous communities talk about the many, many, many decades of work they've been doing around this. talking to people who for this is not new, right? And understanding that the work we're doing today is laying foundations for more work to be done. And this work's not going to be over. There are no saviors. We can't come in here and solve this problem today. And for me, the thing I think that motivates me and a lot of people I know is actually trying to get to solidarity. It's about building true solidarity with other groups and finding ways to connect ourselves to others. And one of the things I've seen come out of this hate capital of Canada, as Evan sort of underlined it for us earlier, has been seeing some really amazing solidarity happen between groups in our community that have been, for whatever reason, separated and segregated. We like to talk about, oh, it's terrible that we had amalgamation in Hamilton. But I think we have to think about, too, what some of the effects of us all coming together have been. And one of those is the extra effect of being able to see one another, the extra effect of being called as part of a larger community called Hamilton together, and what the impact of that can be. And I think there's something hopeful about that. And it certainly keeps me motivated to keep doing this work, knowing that we're getting closer and closer to having solidarity with more and more folks under the big tent.
I have an anecdote and a piece of news that might be of interest to everyone, kind of in the same vein, what's going on in Hamilton right now. And that is, I'm sure many of us know the name Chris Vanderweed. He's the individual at Hamilton Pride who I understand broke somebody's nose with his helmet and fought a number of other people and then went on to commit a number of other assaults in Toronto. We didn't know that his trial was happening, largely because of COVID, and all of a sudden it happened. And despite the fact that he'd been making threats in the interim and even claimed to have assaulted people in the interim, he was given a plea deal. He pled guilty and he got a suspended sentence with some conditions, right? And not that long thereafter, we have infiltrated a private chat that he's in. And inside that private chat, he was arguing with somebody else, and he was calling me and my chair, Bernie Farber, evil Jews and saying that we should be shot. So we took evidence of that to the Hamilton police and asked them to breach him, right? To pull him in on a breach of conditions, because obviously that should breach at least his condition of keeping the peace. They declined. And I'm sharing that story kind of because with our privilege, with our platform, we speak to a lot of people, we have legal resources, we have a lot of privilege coming into this. Not able to kind of get the police to act on these things. Now, I understand that Vanderweed is to be arrested imminently if he hasn't already been, because Peel Police actually stepped in, that being where Bernie lives, to charge him with, I don't know exactly what the charge is going to be, but Peel Police are saying that he is going to be arrested. I hope that happens. Vanderweed is a dangerous individual. But I do just want to highlight that, if the question is, how is the Hamilton Police Service doing? The answer is terribly.
I'd love to jump in here if I could briefly to say that I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing that, but I'm not surprised. In fact, what we saw here in 2019 was the opposite happen. Someone came out to a safe space meeting to air their feelings about feeling safe in their community. And that person was breached, as you say, by the Hamilton police for making public comments about just the way they felt safe in their community. So I'm dismayed and disappointed to hear that when they had the opportunity to do the opposite, they chose not to. And it goes back to your point, Evan, before about what that culture of emboldening people is, why you can so clearly say, and why before Pride 2019 even happened, 5 days beforehand, why on June 10th, you could write an article saying the front line of hate groups in Canada is Hamilton, right? And I think we really need to recognize what that's about. We're really accepting a lot of excuses for behavior that I think that are really problematic from our police services, from our Hamilton Police Services Board about why they can and can't take action. And this should be a really important underscoring for what needs to be done and what should be done, and the real lack of care for those who are most impacted in our communities.
Yeah, thank you so much, Evan, for sharing that information. I was actually just going to ask you guys, what do you guys think about city council and local police and doing the support, and what they're doing to support this work, right? And any advice on how to encourage, wake these institutions in looking after the safety, the needs of all of their community members. So I think The fact that you've shared that piece of information kind of lets us know that we have a lot of work to do with these institutions. Do you have any suggestions in terms of how can we let them know the urgency of the matter?
Me is just honestly, they need to use their ears. Like at this point, I feel like just by saying, oh, like what can we do to help them? Like it's just really playing a game, you know, with them. Because at this point, like we already told them what we want. We already showed them experiences as to where they went wrong. You know, like everything is already, you know, this is what you did and this is how you can help it. So it's kind of just about like, you know, going back to listening to those who are affected instead of trying to come out with, you know, different type of things to basically just shut us up. We need to get to the core of the problems, which obviously is discriminated groups, as Black, Indigenous, people of color, and also LGBTQIA. We've been telling them about these situations where we don't feel protected. So I feel like it's just open conversations. Like, why can't we just have a city council with the whole city? Why is it just, you know, people that don't even look like us talking about what we need? We need to stop doing that. You know, Black people have mouths. We can speak for ourselves. We've been telling you since June, you know, what we wanted, and you're just basically acting like everything we're saying is so out of like crazy and can't be done. Everything that's been built can be rebuilt. So at this point, until they tell us, you know, I'm going to do this and that and that, and that's going to help you out, then my only advice to them is to use these things right here that we're born with, and actually, you know, start effectively listening to both sides, because that's the only way that we're actually going to move forward with anything, as far as anyone feeling slightly safe with the police officers, because they're not really giving anything. Like, I'm sorry, they're not giving any reasons as to why they can't make any changes. Still to this day, I don't understand why they can't defund themselves by 20%. You know what I'm saying? They don't have any type of explanation. So until we as a community understand that they're feeding us something to tell us to be quiet, and we understand that they're working for us and we aren't working for them, then from that point on, then we can actually, as a community, come together. It doesn't matter if you're Black, doesn't matter if you're white, doesn't matter who you are. We all just need to come together and figure out how the police can actually make us feel safe. Because obviously, Black, white, whoever you are, we can see that there's a problem going on within the police community. Unless they actually speak on it publicly and honestly, unfortunately, I don't have any advice for them. That's just me though, so.
I could offer some advice to our elected leaders for sure, and I have many times, and this won't be the last. But I think that what's happening here that's helping to amplify hate are the things that make hate grow, that are easy, environments for hate to flourish. And the biggest one for that for me is silence. When you had for years, not months, not days, years, people showing up to the forecourt of City Hall, espousing hate, down there trying to intimidate people from oppressed communities, you had nothing happening. City Hall wasn't in an outrage. They weren't claiming there was a problem. They were doing something about it. It did take, you know, activists, as they call them, to come down to City Hall and have a peaceful rally before a couple of them showed up for a photo op and showed up and started to take some notice. And it took them something like a year before they implemented a timeline. And it kind of just, you know, for their action, which kind of just happened quietly, without much fanfare. We don't have a real culture here of public officials who lead in public. We have people who tend to sit behind chairs in a council meeting, something that's not always accessible to everybody, something that most people can't find on the internet, and they have chats amongst themselves about what they're going to do. But we need public leadership, loud voices from our elected officials to show up and tell us what they think, what they believe, and what their values are. As far as I'm concerned at this point, there's a real lack of moral authority coming from council. These folks are sitting around talking about procedures and rules and hate crimes. And we get reports like this ridiculous report from the Hamilton Police, which I had sitting here waiting to talk about today as well. Like reports like that, which come out year after year, which say things like, well, one of the hate groups that we should really be concerned about is the hate toward institutions, the hate that police feel in situations. all the scripts that are used here, all the ways that we have to rhetorically talk about the struggles we're having, and the mechanisms we can use to bring these things up in public are being literally turned around and used against us. The last thing I'll say is right now, this past couple of weeks, we've literally had the mayor of our city saying that he doesn't want to embolden people to be critical of the city. Not to embolden white supremacists and folks showing up at the forecourt, but not to embolden people who might be critical of the institution called City Hall. Until we figure out what to do with that, we're doomed.
Okay, thank you so much. Evan, would you like to add something?
Just one brief point. I mean, in some cities, the police are kind of worse in these issues than others. In Hamilton, they stand out. And I would just suggest to people when they do find issues like we did with Vanderweed, threatening us, there are alternative mechanisms to the police, right? You can go to just to the peace or to the Crown and try to lay a private information. Like if you're aware of somebody committing a crime and the police won't give you the time of day to protect you, you can go and try to lay a private information. You can try to go through really official, almost lawyer-like ways with like Twitter and Facebook and them to get them to remove content that threatens you, for example. Now, these don't all work and it's very frustrating, but it's time to get creative, right? When the police don't help you, it's time to get creative. And there are ways to try to find some justice on your own, but it's tricky. I'm not gonna say that there's any solutions there, but I would just, when I first started this, I'm extremely privileged and I was naive enough to think that, we find a bad guy, we have evidence they're doing bad stuff, we go to the police, problem solved. 4 or 5 years later, I've been entirely disabused of that notion, right? That's just not how it works. So I think that there's something to be said about creativity and the need for creativity in addressing specific issues. Like we can all put our thinking caps on and find other ways to keep each other safe.
Okay, so I think we have some questions also and comments from our attendees. One of the comment was about Cameron's point in terms of denial. I think that we are in a great deal of denial around the Hamilton police and their ability and willingness to ever be of assistance to minorized and marginalized communities. They continue to show us who they are and who they will support. We need to believe them and find alternatives to turning to the police. And I think you've touched a bit on that, Evan. There's also another question or comment. It's one of the solidarity actions need to be coming together to find and elect candidates to serve on city council who will work with us to eliminate hate in Hamilton. The present council will never serve our interests, so do we see this happening? So I suppose there's a question in that as well, if what folks do think about this is the elected folks that are around the council table, and if there is any input or comments around how do we get more power and more support from our elected officials, other than waiting for the next election to then organize and think of our own candidates. Is that the only solution sort of that we have in front of us, right? So if anyone wants to touch on elected officials, otherwise I think Gashi has also some questions from folks.
Yeah, I could just say one thing about, talking about running for council and what that's all about in terms of those 4-year wait periods. Unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with those 4-year wait periods, and there's nothing we can do right now. And we have to organize for those periods. We have to be prepared for the next municipal election in 2022. And I think the Hamiltonians have to ask themselves more questions of those folks who are running. Find folks who are doing work in the community. It's not just about your name or your recognition. It's about what you stand for, what you do. Are you doing things to build solidarity in your community? Are you speaking out for people? Are you using the privilege you clearly have for other people or just yourself? So I think we have to come up with a script, right? And I think organizations like this and other organizations around the city can do that. I think they have been doing that for years, but we need to get coordinated and build more solidarity around how we focus those messages and how we evaluate candidates.
Absolutely. There's a comment about limiting the terms of council. Do you guys think that would be something to think about, at least for Hamiltonians in the next election? Okay. On that note, Gashi, do you have any questions from folks?
Yes, so I have some comments and some questions. There's one comment that says, thank you for putting this together. I would be interested in also the intersections within these hate groups, including the disabled community as well, which is a great point. Does anyone have anything to add for that?
Yeah, so within the, within various places that we're online monitoring hate groups, there are not any groups that specifically target individuals with disabilities. However, you will often see language like that used in how they describe their critics, their opposition, and people that they don't like, right? So there is a discrimination and bigotry baked in there, and we can all imagine what kind of language they use. I'm sure we've all heard it before and seen it before, and it should come as no surprise that it is prevalent, kind of among those hate groups, but it is an under-discussed aspect of it. And I would attribute that to both oversight, kind of on our part in discussing it, but also on that it's not a primary thing that they organize. And if I'm wrong about that, and you are aware of any kind of groups or individuals that make it their kind of primary thing, I'd very much appreciate a follow-up. Let me know, and that is something that we would love to shine a light on and take a closer look at.
Yeah, thank you.
I think a little bit, I think it's important to mention, pardon me, that justice is intersectional, right? So we can't be moving ahead without looking next to us and seeing those folks who are in worse positions and taking them with us and making sure they're okay. And so I think that that call for justice and that call for solidarity means finding ways to include everybody in this conversation. And if there are groups out there that are targeting folks, I don't think that's going to last forever. I think eventually that's going to come as we see a rise in hate. And so we have to be preventative a bit and look out for folks in that way.
Okay, so we're just I know that our time check is supposed to be at 5:30. We're just gonna go a little bit over, if that's okay with folks, another 5 minutes or so, because we have a bit more questions. One of the questions that we have is, what is your thoughts on performative awareness efforts versus actually committing to the cause? So perhaps talk on the harm that I guess that may cause.
To be performative is very counterproductive, only because that can only last so long. And like, just based off of what I'm doing with my movement, I'm definitely seeing like a decline as far as like, I don't know if it's just the caring or if it's just not easy anymore. Cause like the more you learn is the more it's like, okay, this is not a trend. This is like real life that people have been going through. So I do make it a point to like kind of call those people out, cause it's like, it's better for you to actually do nothing than just be like, oh, I'm going to come out to this march to be seen, you know? Like this isn't a trend. And I said that literally the first time when there was like 2,000 people looking at me in my eye. I was like, this is not a trend. And since then, it's just been declining over and over and over again. So basically it doesn't, like, you don't have to be present to not be a performer. You know what I mean? To not be a ally, sorry. You can be at your house, right? You can sign a petition that takes 2 seconds. You can really do anything other than just making a post and like maybe just doing that one time. That doesn't really like help, because like we said, this is like a movement, and just like he said, it is a marathon. So it takes all of us, you know, maybe I'm tired right now. I need you, I need her, I need him, I need all of us to come together and do it. So like, and if you are performing, like, don't think that no one knows. Like, we do know. So please don't, like, just know that we see through you. And like, it's COVID, we understand, but there's also online, and that's COVID free. So at this point, there really is no excuse to not be actively involved in any of the multiple movements that are going on currently in 2020. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the performer.
I think I'll just add a little bit to that. I think the worst thing that allies or those who stand in solidarity with these movements can certainly do, especially organizations, is putting out these really wonderful, with beautiful text statements. And then after that statement is out there, that's where the buck ends, right? There isn't really doing stock of the trauma, the issues, the difficulties, the inequalities that an organization has within themselves. So what kind of message that sends to racialized or communities that require true solidarity is that their pain and their trauma isn't one that really requires an actual look at, an actual moment to fix these issues, to get into the depth of these issues and come up with a solution. They are not worthy of that effort or that time, and that pain that they have is not one that is meaningful or that matters, right? And that message is so painful and so strong, and it can tarnish relationships for years to come. So when agencies and organizations are thinking about putting a statement of solidarity with Black Lives Matter, for instance, you need to know also what is it that your agency and your organization is doing to either the staff that are racialized in your space, to the clients that you have, or the interactions that you have with racialized folks outside of your organization after the statement has been published. So I really hope that folks really consider looking inward before putting out these statements going forward. That is true solidarity, in my opinion. If anyone else has anything to add, other than that, I can go ahead and ask the next questions. There are some questions around how can folks that are either new to the city or that don't have connections can get involved and help. I think some of you have touched a bit on that. Is there anyone that has ideas for someone that doesn't know anyone yet in the city but really does want to get involved? What would be the first few things that you would do?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't lived in this city my whole life, so I've been in this position where I have to come to the city and try to figure out what to do. And I have to say, firstly, it's scary. When you watch the conversations we're having, when you read these reports, you don't necessarily feel like it's a place you can just sprint out into and get involved in right away. You feel, and understandably might feel like you're limited in what you can do. And I would say to people is find at first, right, places that you're comfortable to listen, to just sit, absorb. When I first got here, one of the things I did was, because we could do it then, was sit in a council meeting, sit in a small committee meeting at first, just go to these small committee meetings, maybe the advisory committee for the LGBTQ advisory committee or the committee against racism. Just go sit, watch it, participate in the discussion, do what you can, and build from there. Build a capacity, get to know your neighbors, walk around your neighborhood, take a look around, explore what you can safely during COVID. But I think it starts with the little steps of engaging where you can. And then honestly, in Hamilton, I know this sounds strange, but Twitter is still real here. It's died in many other cities and has lost relevancy everywhere almost. But here in Hamilton, in terms of politics, in terms of local organizing, there are lots of folks there. So get onto social media a bit, figure out what the topics are, and then dive in where you're comfortable. And as you gain experience, bring a friend along and get them involved in it. So I think, bringing people with you and engaging at a pace that works for you is going to keep you in this for the long haul. And I think that's the important thing to focus on.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Okay, so I do see the time. I will ask one last question because I think it's really important we touch on this, and it's about mental health and feeling safe in places for us to express ourselves, especially doing this kind of work. I know that things can get very heavy very quickly. How would you, what kind of advice do you have for someone who is trying to do this work, but is also concerned about safe places to express themselves?
My advice would be, if you're having trouble finding anyone to express yourself genuinely, definitely first take a look at your inner circle. If that's your friends, your family, those who surround yourselves with, usually you can find comfort in speaking to them about the situations. Also, YouTube, there's a lot of people that do express what they're going through this movement. So that's a really good way of just reaching out to other people that you might not be able to actually physically speak to. There is also counseling. There is also like yoga. I'm starting to get into yoga because, you gotta keep yourself together before you do something like this. But and also just knowing that what we're doing, it can be taxing on the mental health, but you also have to remember how liberating it is to actually be fighting for what you want. So just kind of keep that balance of, yes, it is a very heavy topic of what we're fighting for, but then in the other realm, it's it's still positive because we're actually doing something and changing something. So I think just keeping the balance on that, and definitely just staying true to yourself and aware of yourself definitely helps in this tough time. So take a nice little bath, light a candle, relax. And then get right back to it. Because like we said, this is an ongoing thing, but you definitely yourself first, because without you, we can't actually keep the fight going and alive. So that's my advice there.
Yeah.
All I could add to that is to say that was perfect advice, and I would take that and should take some more of that myself. But I think it's important also to acknowledge where that question is coming from. That question is coming from us being in a city where there aren't safe spaces for folks in oppressed communities. And also it's coming from a place where we can't deny that there's existential trauma laying on everybody right now, not only because of the pandemic, because of generations of colonial violence, but also because of some of the acute traumas that are happening in our city. And I'd encourage people to look out for one another as much as they can, because this is a tough time. We will get through it by continuing to build solidarity and by taking some of Mani's great advice, but acknowledging the fact and knowing that this is real and it's happening, I think is important, because that question comes from a genuine place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. All right. I mean, I feel like there's so many questions that we can ask, and we can stay here even longer, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of the session. So I do want to thank our guests, Evan Balgord, Amani Williams, Cameron Croach. This has been very informative and inspiring. Thank you so much for the advocacy work you are doing to promote inclusion and being here with us today. And for our guests, I'd like to remind you that this is a series. So our next session is November 18th. Looking at anti-racism and anti-oppression and its connection to hate and a community response. Thank you for taking part today. We look forward to seeing you next time. And I will now say good night, but I will also pass the torch to Michelle Penny, who will now close our session. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Miigwech, I had a wonderful time learning a lot about Hamilton, and I'd love to be able to talk with Hamilton about what Ottawa is doing. But I must admit, I was amazed, and I'm really looking forward to the speaker series. And when you said, Cameron, that Twitter is alive in Hamilton, our elders actually are into Facebook still. And that's how we managed to still communicate. So I thought that was kind of cute. Anyhow, I'm looking forward to hearing more. And but you're right, this is very tiring work. And I think for a closing song, I'd like to sing you a lullaby. And it's a lullaby so that you can rest, because we need to rest every night. Because every day, yes, you're right, is another fight. So take the time to settle into your chair and just enjoy a little bit of a lullaby, okay? Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Way-o, way-o, way-ah, humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Way-o, way-o, way-ah, humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Way-o, way-o, way-ah, humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Humba, 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 hey-o. Humba, hey-o, hey-o. Way-o, way-o, way-ah, humba, hey-o, hey-o. Good night, Miigwech, and have a beautiful evening.